in the year of pivoting, let me ask all like 10 of you. We ran a little bit longer on that service. And so I'm thinking maybe of shifting from a text study to an Ask the Rabbi. Would that be good? Are you open to that? Okay, so maybe we'll do that. So we'll give a few minutes for those in the lobby to join us. How are you all holding up? You hungry yet? We have some yeses, we have some nos. What? Caffeine deprivation. Yes, that's a thing. Do you want a rabbi's trick to that? Like 3 days before, stop drinking coffee. Yeah, that's the trick. The Orthodox have another trick that I'm not going to tell you here, but if you want to find out, ask me privately. Yeah, that happens. Jane, do we have people out in the lobby who are coming in for the study? No, we're good. Okay. Brian, would you be willing to be a microphone runner? Okay. All right. How are you? Doing good? It should be on. Yep. Okay. So, because it's a small group, I don't need this. I don't know why I'm doing that. Because it's a small group and because we ran a little bit late, for those of you who are watching online, we're going to shift from doing the text study that I was going to offer into about a half an hour of Ask the Rabbi so that we have a little bit of time in between services. So this has always been a tradition at Temple Shari Emeth that we offer during the holy days, usually after the early service on Rosh Hashanah. We offer an Ask the Rabbi for people who come with burning questions. Sometimes it's on what's going on in the world. Sometimes it's on the sermon. Happy to take comments on the sermon to open up the discussion because as I hope I clearly stated, this is an important discussion that we need to have. So I'm just going to open it up. If you have a question, raise your hand. Brian will come running to you, and we will start with some questions. Okay. Thanks, Stu. It's good to have a shill.
All right, here's a question that I had. In the liturgy, the prayer book, one of the things that we do on Yom Kippur is ask for those that we trespassed, or those who trespassed against us. And I believe that's the order, because I only read it once a year. So, my 63-year-old brain has to remember from year to year whether or not it goes the other way around. So that's my question. Is it those who trespass against us, forgive us, and those we trespass against? Or is it the other way around? Or does it really matter?
What's the order? That's a good question. I would have to actually see the citation in the prayer book to be able to tell you. But I think it's an interesting question that you're asking, the question of, is it more important for me to seek forgiveness than to receive, to get other people to apologize to me, right? And I would say that Judaism places a really big responsibility on the individual's responsibility. And so is it better to apologize than to be apologized to? I would say it's better to apologize. That's the one thing you can have control over. Like, how many times has someone done something to you and you're just furious and you want an apology? And in fact, I had something like this happen yesterday where someone did something, and had they apologized, it would have been fine. And I really needed that apology, so I said, I know you must feel regret in your heart and that inside you're apologizing, so I forgive you. And then that person said, I'm sorry. But how often can we really do that, right? How often can we sort of cajole people into taking responsibility and apologizing? Does that mean that if someone's harmed you, you shouldn't speak to them, that you shouldn't, confront them about it? I think it's emotionally healthy to be able to go to someone, with compassion and kindness and to say, what you did really hurt me and I need you to know that. And then what they do after that is really on them, right? So I think it starts with us. And I do think also that this sense of modeling, right? If I model for other people what it means to say, I'm sorry, to own my misdeeds, then hopefully that will grow in the world. And I just want to share one short story about this. In college, we had this Hebrew teacher who was very severe, this older Israeli with a very tight black dyed hair bun, and the bun was really big on her hair, and I was terrified of her. I mean, I would make sure my homework I was terrified. And then right before Yom Kippur, she stood before the class and she said, if I have done anything to hurt any of you, my students, please know that it wasn't my intention and please forgive me. It was the first time I'd ever seen someone actually do that in the context of Yom Kippur, and it was so powerful to me because her name was Bruria, because Bruria really modeled for us what it meant to go from being a really strong, controlling person to being vulnerable, to say as a teacher, I'm not perfect. And so for me, that was really powerful. So start with you, and then hopefully it will come back to you.
Thank
you. Thank you. Wow. I came into Yom Kippur with an issue that I wanted to resolve by hearing you and our service, and it just happened. So I'm not leaving, I'm staying the whole day, but I have been wronged by someone, and everyone around knows that I've been wronged, and I'm not taking it personally because that's the problem of the person that wronged me. And what I came to Yom Kippur to resolve was, do I reach out for my own closure? And you kind of just answered that to me. So God works in mysterious ways, and thank you. It just happened through you. By the way, my name is Connie, and I'm a new member, and this is the best decision I've made in years.
Welcome, Connie. We're still happy to have you here. It's nice to see you at Shabbat, too.
Rabbi Panken.
You have to use it so the people online can hear us.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Again, thank you for your sermon yesterday. As you said, not that they understand our ideas or their ideas, but just engage them, because a lot of times they're not engaged with Israel. All they read is what they see in the newspapers, or maybe hear from a non-Jewish college professor or a demonstration. What's the next step that we can do to do that?
Well, I think part of it is starting in our Hebrew schools, right? Being able to utilize curriculum and teaching opportunities to really lay out the complication of this situation, to embrace the pain that Palestinians feel and to embrace the pain that Israelis feel. Because I think what's happening is a lot of our kids are going off to college, and certainly that percentage doesn't only include young people, but I think we're seeing that sort of vast change in the rabbinical students and the cantorial students in that younger generation. So we have to start talking about that. We have to start honestly looking at it. I don't think we should be so afraid to take some time to look at J Street and to look at what's the Jewish group, the Jews for Justice in Palestine. I mean, that's like a far left group, but I think it's important to go online to read what they're saying and to consider what are they missing in the dialogue. Maybe we as a congregation should bring some of those groups in, as well as APAC. Maybe we need to be a place to sort of bring that spectrum of discussion so that we can honestly discuss what people are feeling and what they're concerned with here. And there are wonderful groups, like there's a group called Encounter that takes leaders, rabbis, cantors, political leaders, into the West Bank to spend a few days sleeping over and meeting people in the West Bank and getting the stories on the ground. I think we have to open that dialogue up and not be so afraid of hearing. We may not like what we hear, but is that the worst thing? And I think that applies for America today, right? Like, we've got to be able to sit down and talk with people who have different politics than we do. So Mark, maybe you and I can work on bringing some of that discussion into the congregation, getting ARTSA in there. And I encourage all of you to sign up for ARTSA and get Rabbi Josh Weinberg, who's the director, get his regular emails, because I think that they're really good and honest and really try to speak to both sides of the issues. And I think, it's important for people who are saying the Palestinians are in pain and we have to respond to that, to hear that those of us who believe that Israel should exist and it's okay for Israel to have power, it's important for them to hear, and we care about that pain too. That's going to be really important.
Thank you.
I prefer my feedback after services.
Rabbi, I really liked what you said about on the ground, getting people on the ground. And what I'm saying is that there's a lot of talks from people who really never been on the ground.
Yes.
It really hurts me to hear these talks because my family, my brother, children, are right there on the ground and taking a beating and risking their life every day.
Yep.
And when I call my brother and ask him how you doing, and I'm telling him how am I doing, sending my daughter to college, and he's sending his son this is his second son, to his routine training on the border in Gaza, and then another routine training in Judea and Samaria.
Yep.
And then he's very worried that his son is going to get killed every day. And then I'm hearing these talks. The Palestinians are this, and the Israelis are that. I'm asking myself, okay, send your son to service in Israel, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing this two sides when my daughter talked to my brother's other son that just finished the army, and his opinion are very different than hers. And when we talk to him why his opinions are very different than hers, he's saying, look, I served there 3 years. Send your daughter to serve there 3 years, and then let's hear what she says.
Right.
So I'm liking what I'm hearing, that there needs to be a conversation, but I'm also liking the idea bringing people that actually on the ground. Let's just not talk to the people who talk, or see someone on TV doing a nice presentation and presenting the issue. Let's go on the ground.
Yes.
And talk to the soldiers. And talk to the Palestinians on the other side that do their stuff.
Yeah. And that's part of the conversation that those who are concerned with the Palestinians also need to hear. Why are all of these kids going into the army? Because if there was no army, Israel would not exist. And do Israelis have a right to exist as well? And I think it's really interesting. A few years ago, Birthright would not help to fund any trip that brought kids into the West Bank. And my concern about that, I think Birthright is a really important, because it gets our kids on the ground, it gets them meeting the people we want them to hear from, but only part of it. And I'm afraid it doesn't take the opportunity, like you're saying, to sort of open up the conversation on both sides and show the complexity. Because this is the situation we have. And how do we get out of it and not just live with it? And I think there is that challenge of what right do we as American Jews have to talk to this issue? But we're Jews, and Israelis are Jews, and we're part of the same people, and that's difficult.
I like the talk, but get the information, like you said, from the
Absolutely.
ground.
Yep. Yeah, so the next time I was hoping to do a trip to Israel in 22. I don't know if that's going to happen. Stupid pandemic. But come with me next. I mean, I know you guys have been there. You could help me lead it. But, come with me and come see. Because, we have so many kids now who are going to Israel who are having that experience. And still they're ending up on college campuses calling Israel apartheid and genocidal.
Yeah. I mean, like I just want to tell you the journey.
Hold up the mic.
I just want to tell you the journey of my brother's son. He was 18, came here really, doesn't know from left and is right. Like any American kid. The Israeli kids are like an American kid before they join the army. And then he chose to go to an infantry unit, and he joined this fighting unit, combat unit. And then you can see over the years how his opinions changed.
Interesting.
So I think that we know that there is a complexity. But what concerns me, all these messages that are coming at the level that are very different from what the ground is. I mean, there are wonderful Palestinians. There are wonderful people on both sides. But I think if we want to get involved, let's get to talk to these people on the ground.
Yes, and let me just throw another thought out there, because I was, before my sermon turned into 40 minutes, one of the other things I almost wanted to address this year was like the question of Ben and Jerry's, right?
Yeah.
And do we continue to eat Ben and Jerry's? Ben and Jerry's said they're no longer going to sell ice cream to settlements in the West Bank. And, it's part of that whole BDS movement. Let's just take our toys and go home and not engage and try to hurt you. And the fact of the matter is, I'm not sure how much withholding your ice cream hurts or makes a difference. But what could make a difference is if you take all the proceeds from the ice cream that gets sold in the West Bank and put it into NGOs that are doing really good work on the ground, like Encounter, and other NGOs that are bringing Israelis and Palestinians together to make connections. So let's stop talking about BDS. That's not working. It hasn't worked. It hasn't pushed the needle. And I don't think that it will. However, if you really care about peace and not just punishment, then find ways to support the things that are going to bring peace between people, so that Israelis can finally say, like, well, I don't want to send my kids to have to fight this war. And Palestinians can say, I really don't want to suffer Israel's wrath when Hamas is sending 4,000 bombs onto Israel. But that's where I think we'll make the difference. It's about bringing people together and making the connection. Yes, Tamima.
So just picking up a word that you said, I don't think Israelis want to send their kids to the army, period.
Yes.
They need to.
Yes.
And
Amen.
that's a major difference in this complex, very, very complex issue.
Yes. Other questions?
Okay, I have a trivial question. Can you give us the background behind not wearing leather shoes?
Oh, sure. It's in the Talmud. It talks about what are you supposed to do for Yom Kippur, and there are these mitzvot. The mitzvah of fasting, of not anointing, of not having sexual relations, of not wearing shoes, and I think I'm forgetting one. But the whole idea is to sort of remove. Leather comes from a living animal, right? So by removing that opportunity to sort of take from the living world, to take a life, you remind yourself of the dominance that you have over plant life, over animal life. And so it's a reminder to pay attention to life. That's...
It's in the same category as fasting?
It is, actually, yeah. Yeah. It's a lot easier to do, right? But it's interesting because, like, what's the one thing you put on your body every day? I mean, there are many things you put on your body every day, hopefully. But what's the last thing you do before you leave the house? You put on shoes. So this whole idea of changing your regular shoes into something different is also an act of paying attention to the day, right? So similar to kashrut, I have to eat during the day, and if I'm thinking about being Jewish as I have to eat, it helps to sort of set my mind on this moment and pay attention to the food and where it comes from. And putting on shoes as the last act of walking out of your house, you can think of it symbolically of how do I portray myself to the world? I grew up on the Upper West Side, and on Yom Kippur, you'd see all the Orthodox walking through the neighborhood wearing white tennis shoes. And it was holiday because of that. You'd know it was Yom Kippur. So perhaps it's also the outward symbol to other people, but it's also a reminder that as you walk out the door, this is what you're taking with you. Yom Kippur is coming with you, and you have to do this work even in the way you dress yourself. Other questions? Burning questions?
I have a question that has to do with the way we pray, and I guess it's something that I don't know. I'm trying to figure out whether we need to find when we say Baruch and we
Bow?
bow. Do we do it toward the Torah, or we need to find east?
Yeah. I realized when I walked in here, I didn't orient myself to where east is. Traditionally, you would do it towards east. In Shariamet Sanctuary, it was oriented towards the east. Here, I just automatically turned to the ark, not quite sure where east was, but traditionally, you would orient yourself towards east, towards Jerusalem.
Thank you.
Which way is east in here? Does anyone know? It's that way?
Are you raising your hand or you're pointing east?
When I worked in the city, and we were in a congregation at Temple Shari Tefillah on the Upper West Side. It was my first pulpit. And the congregation was an old movie theater, and it had a balcony and everything. So we always faced west, and I always thought to myself, well, if we just follow it around, we'll get back to east. But we couldn't change the layout of the sanctuary, unfortunately.
Sorry about that, losing my kippah. With your permission, if it's okay, I'd like to make a statement in regard to what this gentleman was talking about Israel. And the statement is simply a close family member of mine recently hit me with, Dad, I gave it up, sorry about that. Dad, why don't you watch a video? And it was a fascinating video because it had to do, and I guess it was 20, 25 years old, and it had to do with an African-American gentleman, and it appeared on CNN years ago, and a gentleman, the African-American gentleman's name was Darrell Davis, and it was a TED Talk. And I Googled it after reading the post, and the guy gave like a half-hour conversation where he sat down with an imperial wizard of the KKK. And after forming this friendship with them, or relationship with these two individuals, I'll say, and just that through dialogue and respect for each other, the end, I won't give up the end of the story, but watch it, and it's how people coming from two different entities and obviously adversaries, how they were able to find some common ground to stand on. And that's what I thought of when you so eloquently depicted your personal relationship and your family's relationship with Israel. So thank you for letting me make that statement. And Rabbi, thank you.
Sure. Actually, a few years ago, I had given a sermon where I included a story of, I don't know if any of you read it in the New York Times Magazine, but it was about a young man who had grown up in the clutches of a KKK family, of a white supremacist family, was the godson of David Duke. He was right in the center of this. And he went to college, and he realized that he couldn't just sort of spew his rhetoric and his anger without people pushing back against it. And then there was a young man, a Jewish man, who invited him to Shabbat dinner. And that relationship helped him to extract himself from the hatred. And, he walked away from his family, he walked away from all of it, because he saw, based on the personal connection, that what he had been taught wasn't really the best way of viewing the world. And again, that's an oversimplification, I think, when you're talking about Israel. But I also know in Israel there are a lot of people, both Palestinian and Israeli, who just want to live in peace, who want this conflict to end, who want to go about their day-to-day life without having to worry about this in the future. So how can we tap into those people? You're such a quiet group. You can ask anything. I'll answer almost anything. Marion has a question.
I just came in, so I don't know if this was asked already, but I was just curious, no names or anything, but what part of Judaism were those cantors and rabbis, Reform?
Oh, my goodness. So the interesting thing about that letter is that it came from everything. I'm trying to think if there were any modern Orthodox on it. I have to go back and look. But there were definitely, it was from JTS, from the conservative movement, from University of Judaism, which is a conservative movement, from HUC, from Ohala, from the Academy, from Jewish University up in Boston. It came from many, many different rabbinical students.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
No. Thank you.
Go read the letter. Google it and read it. See what you think. Hear what they're saying. And I think also, I always encourage everybody, we're so used to just reading the news that we like to hear, the news sources that give us the story from the perspective that jives with what we what we read. But, read everything that comes out of Israel. Read the Jerusalem Post, read Haaretz, sign up for a couple of good Israeli papers online. Read the foreword. Makes me want to tear my hair out most of the time, but it's worth, it's important. We have to be challenged. We have to hear different perspectives, not just on Israel. I really think on everything. It's important to read and not just get stuck in the worldview that you have. Yes, Joan. Where? Yeah.
Can you just let people who aren't aware of the letter to which you are referring?
Sure. It's the letter I talked about last night. It was a letter that was penned by 90 cantorial and rabbinic students across different denominations who used the word apartheid in describing Israel, and very, very controversial. Oh, a question all the way in the back. Is that Cindy? Hi, Cindy. It's very bright up here. This is why I'm not going to become a Broadway actress.
Sitting here processing what the gentleman in the front who has family in Israel was saying, and it reminds me of an Israeli television program that I watched, I think on Netflix, Fauda, yeah. Fauda, which was written by an Israeli and a Palestinian, and it talks about black ops on both sides, and every operation goes sideways, and like they're both wrong. And it seems to me that the people who are in the conflict, who have bullets aimed at them and who are aiming bullets at others, who are blowing each other up, get radicalized because they are in imminent danger of their own person and their buddies that they train with. And I don't know if those are the best people to sit at the table to discuss how to put an end to it, because there's no way that it's not personal. And I think that television program really opened you up to that it became personal immediately. It was, my wedding, it was my girlfriend, it was my husband, it was, it's very, very personal. And in a way that the conversation has to be removed from that, because concessions have to be made on both sides.
Yes. I mean, it's my child in the Army. It's my inability to get to work. These are the personal stories. And I think, I was just going to go somewhere with this. I'm always moved by, when you read a story about, someone whose child was killed in a terrorist attack, who has the wherewithal to turn that moment into an act of reaching out and making connection, because that's personal too, right? But that also reminds us that there's choice in that personal. And perhaps that sort of touches upon Yom Kippur, right? To be able to forgive. One of the texts I was going to share with you was a text by Elie Wiesel, who, I don't know if you have the text in front of you, but he says, "I cannot and don't want to forgive the killers of children. I ask God not to forgive." One perspective on the Holocaust, and then another perspective on the Holocaust was from Eva Moses Kor, an Auschwitz survivor who just died last year, actually. And she wrote, on January 27, 1995, at the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, I stood by the ruins of the gas chambers with my children while I read my document of forgiveness and signed it. As I did that, I felt a burden of pain was lifted from me. I was no longer in the grip of pain and hate. I was finally free. The day I forgave the Nazis privately, I forgave my parents, whom I hated all my life, for not having saved me from Auschwitz. Children expect their parents to protect them, and mine couldn't. And then I forgave myself for hating my parents. Forgiveness is really nothing more than an act of self-healing and self-empowerment. I call it a miracle medicine. It is free, it works, and it has no side effects. So, what I think is interesting is to see, what is the difference between the one who can forgive and release themselves from the hatred, from the pain, and one who can't. And we certainly know there are both kinds of people in the world. But Yom Kippur is about opening the heart of compassion, the heart of forgiveness, even in the face of personal pain. It's very challenging. And I know I speak it in very optimistic ways because I'm an eternal optimist, and I always cling to hope, that one day, even those who are most personally invested and the most personally hateful, that even that can change. I believe people can change. Yes, Ailey? Hold on. We want the people on TV to hear you.
First, I apologize for drawing the conversation to Israel. So
first of all, don't apologize. That's what we're here for, right?
So I didn't. What I wanted to emphasize is that the fact that it's complex, that and the personal stories on the ground, and the fact that people come up with statements that 30,000 miles up, and there's no relationship to reality. Yeah. That there is also an historical connotation here, and we are seeing also a world context here, right? Right. Just now, the Taliban took over Afghanistan. I mean, if you look at the historical context here, Israel gave back Gaza and Judea and Samaria. There was an intention here to coexist and to seek resolution through conversation. And nobody wants this war.
Yeah.
Everybody today wants to live like America, right? So if you put this in context, if my brother say, okay, forget about that. I don't want my kids to go to the army. I'm coming to America. And eventually, the equivalent of the Taliban will take over Israel.
Yeah.
There are elements out there that despite conversations and trying to reach out, there are elements that seek their purpose in a certain means. Yeah. So I like what you're saying, the complex, and I like what you're saying, that let's get people to talk to each other. Let's find the elements that are reasonable and wants to talk, and maybe we can lower the flame and be able to create bridges that will calm the majority of these threats.
Yeah.
But people need to understand that there is another side that they now read in the newspaper. That is like the Taliban, that there are extreme elements out there, right. and it's a challenge to deal with these extreme elements and to deal with these extreme elements in Israel.
Yep.
People like us, like you and I, that are educated. The last thing we want is send our kids. The last thing we want is to send our kids to harm's way. Yep. Have to do that.
Yeah.
Because they need to exist. And even when they do that, right now there is no solution. My mother, 88 years old, needed to run in the middle of the night when she was asleep to shelter because there was no answer to the missiles.
Yeah.
So it's complex.
It's so complex, and when I talk about getting people at the table, much of my concern is about American Jewry. and where we are here, because I think it's a different situation in Israel, much more existential. Like Daniel Hartman was saying, Israelis are used to this. We expect this. But American Jews, we're like, oh, no, a war. Like it has a different feeling to us. And I think also it's the question of what are we going to do in our world with fanaticism? Because the fanatics take up all the air, right? Most Israelis want to live in peace. Most Palestinians want to live in peace. And the fanatics drive this. The fanatics here are driving hatred and anti-Semitism and racism, and it's the same there. It's just, same people, different topic. And I think that's the greatest challenge to this world right now. Like what are we going to do with misinformation that drives everything? And that's where I'm afraid about words like apartheid and genocide, because it's not really capturing what it is there. It's a problem, but it's not apartheid and it's not genocide. But once you start throwing those words out, they're like grenades, right? And that's where I want to make sure in America, Jews are having that conversation with the younger Jews. That's really important. But thank you, Ailey. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your bringing this perspective to the conversation, because it's important. And in some levels, I feel very uncomfortable. I did it last night, but I feel very uncomfortable talking for Israelis because I'm not Israeli. And also, there are so many different sides here. So if I misrepresented in any way, I apologize. But I did want to try to sort of bring an Israeli perspective to this whole discussion as well. How would you feel if 4,000 bombs were dropping on your head? Would you really, really, really want to make peace with Hamas, or would you just want to blow them up? And it says a lot that Israel has always tried to stop Hamas, but not destroy Hamas. So that's an important piece of this as well. We're gonna stop. It's time. Everybody take a 2-minute break. Thank you very much for all the questions. And we will begin our late morning service in just a few moments.